Under God, 7th edition, updated and revised by William C. Hendricks, Chapter 18, A Nation of Immigrants. Important ideas to look for. Immigrants came to the United States for various reasons. Immigrations to the United States is referred to as old and new. Immigrants made a great contribution to American culture. Our government no longer limits immigration by a national origins quota system. People from many lands. We are a nation of immigrants. All the people of our country are either immigrants themselves or descendants of people who were. Scientists generally agree that even the American Indian originated on another continent. The ancestors of some of us arrived in America more than 300 years ago. The forefathers of others have come to America more recently. The United States is called a pluralistic society because people of every nationality have come to make their home here. Out of the different cultural backgrounds of our immigrant people, our nation has developed and grown. Large-scale immigration. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door from the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, inscribed on the base of the Statue of Liberty. Many early immigrants came to the America in search of religious freedom. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, the Quakers, the Huguenots, and some other groups. Some people came because they wanted greater political freedom than they could find in their European homelands. Others came because the nation in which they lived was filled with political unrest or often at war. The famine in Ireland brought many immigrants from that country. To all of the poor people of other continents, to people who had been made homeless by the ravages of war, to people who lived in huddled masses, America was a land of golden opportunity. The old immigration, although the stream of immigrants had been rather steady since the close of the Revolutionary War, the flow began to increase rapidly after 1840. The Homestead Act, passed in 1862, granted 160 acres of land to anyone who can improve it and live on it for 5 years. This free land brought many settlers to the central and western parts of our country. The contract labor law passed by the Congress in 1864 permitted American factory owners to hire workers in Europe and bring them to America to work. This system enabled many people to come to America who could not otherwise do so because they could not pay their ship fare. Now the factory owner could buy the ticket and take its cost out of the wages the person would later earn in the American factory. In the years before 1890, most of the immigrants came from the countries of Western and Northern Europe. These people found it quite easy to adjust to the living conditions in America. They soon learned the English language, they learned the customs of America quickly, and they found it easy to feel at home. The immigrants who came to America before 1890 made up what is known as the old immigration. The new immigration after 1890, a noticeable change began to take place in the stream of immigrants that was moving from Europe to America. Instead of a majority of people coming from England, Sweden, Norway, Ireland, Germany, and many other northern European countries, the immigrants from the countries of southern and eastern Europe came in the largest numbers: Italians, Slavs, Serbs, Russians, Poles, Jews, Greeks, Romanians, and many others came to take their place in the nation of immigrants. The years of 1890 to 1920 are called the period of the new immigration. When the people of the old immigration arrived in America, land was cheap or free, and plenty of it was available. Factories needed workers, so it was easy to find a job, and housing was not too crowded. They found it quite easy to learn the language and adopt the customs and people already in the United States. But when the new immigrants began to arrive, the best land had already been claimed. Most of them had to live in crowded areas of large cities. The best jobs in the factories had already been taken. Because the members of the new immigration were generally very poor, they did whatever work they could find. Working in the mines and factories, they accepted whatever wages they were offered. Because they were willing to work for very low wages, the new immigrants were disliked by many workers of the old immigration. The people from Southern and Eastern Europe found it more difficult to learn the language used in the United States. Their language sounded strange to the earlier immigrants who were now able to speak English. Because of the language problems, large groups of immigrants from one country would gather to live in a section of a large city. Here they would continue to speak their own language and use their old world customs. Nearly every large city had a section where Polish was spoken, a Little Italy, a Chinatown, or an immigrant group from other nation. Each of these ethnic groups had contributed to the culture of our country. Gradually, the people of the new immigration also felt more at home in America. Homelands of our immigrants. In 1820, our government began to keep a record of the people who entered the United States. Since that time, people of many nations have entered and become citizens of our country. More than 1 million immigrants came from each of the 11 nations in the 173 years between the beginning of 1820 and the end of 1993. During the last 2 decades, the numbers of people coming from certain homelands has shifted, with more individuals coming from Mexico, China, and India. Such shifts are not always apparent when statistics are summarized over long time spans. We should remember that while people are immigrating to the United States, there are others immigrating, leaving to become citizens of another country. Still, the number leaving is nowhere near the number of immigrants. Contributions of immigration. The immigrants who came to America brought with them their ideas and hopes, their skills and energy, their way of life, as these people settled into the United States. The ideas they brought from the Old World mingled with the ideas of the pioneers and people who were already living in America. Under God's providential care, this mixture of ideas from all groups and nationalities of immigrants gradually produced what we call the melting pot of our American culture. Immigrants arriving today still add to American culture. When our nation was just beginning, it was blessed with varied and abundant natural resources. But it takes people to develop resources. Mining coal and working in the steel mills, plowing the prairie sod, cutting down the forests, mixing concrete for buildings, and pounding spikes into the heavy railroad ties. Much of this hard, tiring, and often low-paid work needed for the development of our natural resources was done by the people who had recently come to America. Many foreign-born people brought us their inventive talents. Alexander Graham Bell was born in Scotland. He is a good example of our many foreign-born inventors. Others, like Andrew Carnegie, also from Scotland, became leaders in the world of business and industry. Charles Steinmetz, born in Poland, taught us a great deal about electricity. Albert Einstein, a German, helped our nation in the field of science with his research in nuclear physics. In the field of music, we find that a majority of our prominent figures were foreign-born. Fritz Kreisler in Austria, Victor Herbert in Ireland, Enrico Caruso of Italy, and Sergei Kuzvisky in Russia. Samuel Gompers, born in England, became a labor leader in America. Karl Schurz from Germany became a senator and Secretary of the Interior. He helped to start our civil service program. To this small list could be added the names of many, many other immigrants who have helped America in the past. More could be added every year as new immigrants enter our country to take up their work beside us. For this nation of immigrants, whether they have been here for many years or have recently arrived, our government seeks to provide liberty and justice, hope and opportunity for all. Attitudes towards immigrants. Not many of us know what it is to leave our friends and relatives in order to start a new home in a strange land. We can hardly realize the problems of moving to a new country where people cannot understand us and where we cannot understand them, where the customs of the people are quite different from those we are used to, where we cannot read the signs and where the laws are strange to us. If we are truly thankful to God for the blessings of freedom that He has given to us, we should be happy to share these blessings with others who have recently come to our nation. We must be willing to allow others the same freedoms we wish for ourselves. When we do this, we will be following the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do to you. This is one of the first rules of Christian citizenship. It's strange that some people in our nation distrust or dislike the foreign-born newcomers. Most people in the United States are immigrants or descendants of immigrants. The immigrants who came early surely should not look down on those who arrived later. For, as humorist Will Rogers remarked, not everybody was able to catch the first boat. If an immigrant or any newcomer arrives in your school or in your neighborhood, you have an opportunity to carry out Christ's wishes. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Control of immigration. As the stream of immigrants flowing into the America increases in size, many citizens became alarmed. They feared that foreign-born people were entering the United States faster than we could train them in the ways of American citizenship. Others realized that when immigrants came to America, they were often willing to work for lower wages than Americans were used to receiving. These lower wages tended to lower the American standard of living. This was particularly true on the west coast of our country, where Chinese coolie laborers was being used in mining and railroad building. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act became our first immigration law. This act allowed Chinese to enter our country for short visits or for study in our schools, but did not permit them to stay, become citizens, or take the jobs. In 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt made a gentleman's agreement with Japan. This was not a written law, but the Japanese immigration was greatly restricted. By 1924, other laws excluded all Oriental people except for temporary visits. Since World War II, Korean War orphans, Vietnamese refugees, and a few other Asians have entered. A foreigner who wishes to enter the United States to work may not do so if the United States laborers are available for such labor and if the employment of aliens would adversely affect them. In addition to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, other laws were added that year to keep beggars and stowaways and criminals and insane people from entering the United States. In 1885, the contract labor law was repealed so that businessmen could no longer hire people in foreign countries and bring them into the United States to work. People with serious, contagious, and incurable diseases were excluded in 1891. Another restriction, the literacy test, was added in 1917. This test required an adult to read and write in some language before entering the United States. This same law kept out alcoholics and subversive people who believed in the violent overthrow of our government. Together, these immigration laws kept out many people who could have freely entered before. These laws also provided that any immigrant not permitted to enter had to be taken back to his homeland by the steamship company. The quota system. In spite of all the restrictions, large numbers of immigrants continued to stream into the United States. Because Congress was worried about the widespread unemployment in the United States in 1921, they passed an Emergency Quota Act. In 1924, the Lodge-Johnson Act made the quota system more permanent. This act said that a European country could send only a limited number of immigrants to our country in any one year. The quota of a country was to be 2% of the number of people from that country in the United States in 1890. This plan favored the countries of Northern and Western Europe because immigrants from these countries had come in the largest number during the old immigration. Although the original Lodge-Johnson Act quotas have been changed many times, the quota system is still with us today. The National Origins Act of 1929 limited the total number of immigrants to 150,000 per year. This lowered the quotas of most countries even more. This act was more fair to the countries of the new immigration because it changed the date for figuring the quota from 1890 to 1920. In 1952, another change was made when the Oriental exclusion policy was repealed, and all the countries of Asia and the Far East were also included in the quota system. Between the years of 1929 and 1965, the quota of the country was figured as a percentage of the citizens from that country living in the United States at the time of the 1920 census, but no country had a quota of fewer than 100 immigrants per year. Great Britain had the largest quota, 65,721. Second was Germany with 25,814. Other examples would be Holland at 3,136 and the USSR with 2,697. And as far down the list, Japan of 185 and China with 105. In the wake of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Congress set out to reevaluate the nation's immigration policies, trying to balance humanitarian and economic factors, as well as making the quota system fairer. They phased out the quota system over several years and allowed immigrants from any one non-Western Hemisphere country to enter on a first-come, first-qualified basis that still stands today. The law increased the totals from countries outside of the Western Hemisphere to 170,000 per year and established a maximum of 120,000 for Western Hemisphere nations. For the first time in America's history, Western Hemisphere immigrants, including Latin America and Mexicans, were given a numerical ceiling, and special attention was given to refugees. The Immigration Act of 1965 gave preference to those individuals with special talents or skills needed in our country. In addition, Western Hemisphere immigrants had to secure a job in the U.S. before they were allowed entry, even though no corresponding penalty was instituted for businesses hiring illegal immigrants. Priority was given to the immigrants who had a close family relationship with the U.S. citizen or permanent resident aliens. No numerical limits were placed on the number of these reunification visas, reflecting the value placed on the family union. While the intent was to make the policies fairer, several unintended consequences caused concern and laid the groundwork for a host of problems that are now being faced today. Many felt the law only substituted discriminations based on the national origin with that of job skills, resulting in a brain drain on other nations. Removing the national quotas benefited the Asia-Pacific Triangle the most, leading to the significant influx from that region, while prospective Western Hemisphere immigrants now faced a processing backlog. Since the children of residents, foreigners born in the U.S. are naturalized citizens, and since the parents of such a U.S. citizen could become beneficiaries, the incentive to immigrate illegally skyrocketed. Many U.S. companies simply turned a blind eye to the labor certification process, preferring to hire illegal aliens who were willing to work for lesser wages. The result was that the job market of Americas was decimated in certain occupations. For immigrants from all countries, the preference provided for family members fueled an unforeseen chaining effect. After adult brothers and sisters became citizens, their respective spouses would have preference, which in turn would cause their immediate relatives to gain preference, and so on. In response, Congress amended the 1965 legislation in 1976 and 1978, removing the hemisphere distinctions and establishing a worldwide policy with a quota of 290,000, including the 20,000 per country limit, but still excluding the immediate family members from that ceiling. Many critics felt that while the unified world policy seemed more equalitarian, it overlooked our nation's traditional ties with certain countries and fueled further illegal immigration from Mexico. The accelerated migration of undocumented aliens and economic woes of the early 1980s led Congress to enact the Immigration Reform and Council Control (IRCA) in 1986. It sought to offer a compromise between competing forces. Certain farming sectors required migratory workers to process the harvest. Others felt the nation bore a responsibility for turning a blind eye and allowing so many illegal immigrants to enter, many of whom had set up life here. Calls for widespread amnesty were considered in order. This in turn brought concerns that this would only encourage more undocumented immigration. So the bill made provisions for stronger enforcement and added penalties for knowingly hiring undocumented workers. Our nation's inability to control the influx of undocumented migration along with Mexican border took on new significance in the light of the events of 9/11 and the subsequent economic collapse. The immigration issues teetered precariously between concerns for security and globalization. The strain placed on tax-funded social services such as schools, family assistance, and emergency rooms, particularly in states that are suffering budget shortfalls, intensified the debate. Critics countered that the undocumented workers added payroll taxes to the mix, ignoring the fact that most of these weren't listed on the payroll and were paid under the table. The federal government has done little to address the burden of the states except to declare unconstitutional the regulations the states have tried to put into effect to enforce the nation's immigration laws. In addition to these economic issues, our immigration policies have impacted social, religious, political, and demographic sectors as well. Many in the African American community feel that the nation has ignored the ongoing problem of discrimination as well as worsening conditions of the inner cities. Poor living conditions for many illegal immigrants have encouraged gang membership. Rival gangs based on different races plague cities and suburbs like children from Hispanic households are less likely to speak English than their non-Hispanic immigrant counterparts, making it difficult to mainstream them into graded classrooms. Health standards also tend to be lower among foreign-born individuals, which has led to a resurgence of diseases that were otherwise rarely encountered in the United States. Several immigration reform bills were introduced in Congress in 2005 and 2007. In an attempt to find a bipartisan solution to these problems, neither bill passed. Exceptions to the quota system. Beyond the quota system, the nation's immigration policies allowed for other considerations. Throughout history, Congress has accommodated special situations that arose. After World War II, there were many people of war-torn countries who were homeless. They were anxious to come to the United States, but their national quotas were filled. Congress met this emergency by passing the Displaced Persons Act. This act allowed 400,000 of these homeless people to enter our country. This did not mean that our nation had discarded the quota system. These immigrants were figured as part of their country's figure quotas. Some countries had used up their quotas for the next 50 years. In 1965, law removed this strange problem. In 1953, Congress passed a law permitting many more refugees from the Iron Curtain countries to enter the United States. These people needed to meet the personal characteristics required of all immigrants. They had to be sponsored by a friend or a relative in America who would guarantee to arrange for a home and job for the immigrant and his family so that the government would not have to support them. At the end of the Vietnamese War of 1975, our government made special arrangements to bring about 130,000 refugees into our country. In 1980, Castro allowed thousands of people to leave Cuba. They came by boat to Florida. Similar situations of distress or political oppression have resulted in refugees from areas such as Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Iran. Aliens. Not all the people from foreign nations who enter the United States come as immigrants with a desire to make their homes here. Many aliens come to our country as non-immigrants. Some come as students, others come as tourists, news reporters, temporary laborers. Each must apply for a specialized visa. Depending on the purpose of their stay while they are here, they are under the authority of our government and must obey our laws. In the past, aliens had to register with the government each January through the U.S. Postal Service. Yearly registration was dropped in favor of requiring notification of changes of address and certain other specifications. In the post-9/11 era, the USA Patriot Act mandated the development of an enter-exit notification system, with different registration requirements based on certain countries of origin. Elements of that law have been disputed, prompting attempts to drop the requirements either through legislative changes or executive orders. The Immigration Act of 1965 did away with the country of origin quota system, but there are still quotas in place for the different types of visas. Currently, each year, only 226,000 immigrants can receive family-based visas. 140,000 can receive employment-based green cards. 55,000 can receive green cards in a lottery, and 90,000 can enter as refugees. A green card is the generic name given to the United States Permanent Resident Card, formerly the Alien Registration Card. Not surprisingly, it is green in color, and many precautions have been instituted to discourage illegal duplication. In much the same way as the nation's currency, permanent residents 18 years of age or older must carry their valid physical green card at all times. Failing to do so carries the possibility of a fine up to $100 or imprisonment for up to 30 days for each offense. The lottery refers to the diversity visa program instituted in 1995 as the result of the Immigration Act of 1990. The goal was to diversify the immigrant population by selecting applicants from countries with low rates of immigration during the previous 5 years. Certain countries that have sent more than 50,000 immigrants in the previous 5 years are excluded. The lottery specifications do not include refugees of those seeking asylum. In 2012, over 14 million applicants applied for the 55,000 available visas. Evaluation of our immigration system. Is our immigration system pleasing to God? Do we have a right to keep so many people of foreign nations out of our country? If God has blessed us with rich natural resources, should we not be more willing to allow anyone who wishes to enter our country and share these blessings with us? The answers are especially important since most of the people who ask to enter our land come from countries of hunger, distress, and want. In addition, there's a growing concern about the cost of providing health care for families and education for children in states such as Florida and California, where large numbers of aliens, both legal and illegal, are crossing our borders. How can our nation be under God if it excludes so many who would like to enter? To answer these questions, we should begin by remembering that God has ordained many governments in this world. Long ago, the Tower of Babel, God caused many languages to exist so that the people would spread over the world and eventually form many nations. To each of the governments that God has ordained, he has given the responsibility of serving as a servant of God for good to the people of that nation. This command makes each government responsible for the general welfare of its own people. God does not expect or command the government of India to provide for the general welfare of the people of Switzerland, nor does he expect the government he has ordained in Denmark to provide liberty and justice for the people of the United States. At the same time, we must bear in mind that concern and compassion for others may not stop at a political boundary. To be indifferent to the needs of others, wherever they live, is as wrong today as it was when Christ condemned those who were concerned only about their own kind in Matthew 5:46-48. The government's exercise of authority must weigh the best interests of its citizens against those of all people throughout the world. We are not only globally connected, all are endowed by the Creator with life. Genuine concern for others demands what we share with them the opportunities we enjoy. This is a real issue. There are at least two ways to approach the problem. One is to allow people to migrate to nations where immigrants envision greater opportunities. The United States has long been looked upon as such a land. Another possibility is to extend to other nations such help as will make their citizens more willing to stay in their native lands and help develop their resources and create new opportunities there. Resources don't just exist, waiting to be found like a coin on the street. In a sense, they become as a result of what people do to make them serviceable. Think of what such contrasting nations as mountainous Switzerland and the desert like Israel have done to develop resources and provide for their own growing populations. When an immigration problem arose in the city of Geneva in 1550 during the days of John Calvin, no immigration quotas were imposed on refugees, but instead new industries were begun to provide employment. Examples of the United States assisting other nations are the Marshall Plan to war-torn Europe following World War II and the Point Four program, through which aid was extended to other nations as well. In any case, the motivation should be the concern and love for others. Love finds its expression in different ways at different times and places. Immigration policies are usually a mixture of allowing would-be immigrants to enter and prohibiting them from coming in great numbers. The United States has never had to face the problem of what to do when people leave a nation in swelling numbers. East Germany handled its problem by putting up the Berlin Wall and other fencing to keep its citizens from leaving. A problem similar to that of immigration from abroad involves immigration from one part of the United States to another. Such movements is often from areas with few employment opportunities, such as farming areas, Appalachia, or from cities where factories close and many people lose their jobs. There are no legal restrictions to prohibit anyone from moving to any other place in the United States. The question is whether it would be better to provide opportunities for the people where they now live, rather than to allow them to drift haphazardly into the large metropolitan areas, which already have a good share of poverty, unemployment, and overcrowding housing.